Welcome to your weekly personal finance recap. This past week served up a hearty mix of economic resilience, cooling inflation, with a catch, some surprising shifts in taxes and investments, and a few cautionary tales to keep your wallet safe. We've grouped the biggest themes, from the high-level economic story down to quirky personal finance news, so you can catch up in an easy, story-driven way. Grab a cup of coffee, maybe a cheaper brand if you're budgeting, and let's dive in. The economy defies expectations, for now. The U.S. economy is refusing to slow down in the face of predictions. Despite new trade tariffs creating shockwaves, President Trump has rattled sabers with tariffs on allies and rivals alike. Key indicators remain upbeat. Inflation is modest, the stock market is up, and unemployment is still near record lows. It's almost as if the economy didn't get the memo that it was supposed to falter. Consumers are still spending, companies are hiring, and growth has proven unexpectedly resilient. Economists are marveling at how long this can last without tipping into recession, and some insist it's too soon to tell if we're truly in the clear. But for now, Main Street is enjoying the good times even as Wall Street analysts scratch their heads. Behind the good news, there are emerging tensions. A potential transatlantic trade skirmish is brewing. US and EU officials scrambled in talks this week to avert a tariff war ahead of a meeting between President Trump and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. And in a dramatic twist, Trump escalated his feud with the Federal Reserve, taking his war on Fed Chair Jay Powell right to the central bank's doorstep. Current and former Fed officials are alarmed at the widening assault on the Fed's independence. It's an unusual spectacle. A president golfing in Scotland one day, then blasting the Fed's policies the next. Thus far, none of this political theater has derailed the economic engine, but it certainly adds spice to the financial outlook. Meanwhile, stock markets have been a tale of two emotions: greed versus fear. On the surface, greed, or more precisely FOMO, the fear of missing out, has been powering frothy asset prices as investors chase the rally. Tech stocks and index funds have climbed as everyone rushes not to miss the party. But scratch that surface and you'll find fear is the real driver. Fear can turn on a dime. In fact, the Financial Times lead story this week argued that fear, not greed, ultimately drives the stock market. Right now, it's fear of missing gains pushing people in, but the fear of losses could be set to take over next. Translation: the market's mood is fickle. One week it's euphoria. The next, a whiff of bad news could send traders running for cover. Indeed, some analysts warn of bubbles brewing. Wall Street has seen bouts of euphoria lately that have prompted bubble warnings from market veterans. Anytime people start saying, "This time is different," or "stocks only go up," those with longer memories get nervous. For now, no major bubble has burst, but the cautionary voices are growing louder. A half-year checkup on winners and losers in the stock market also revealed a classic pattern. Last year's worst performers have been bouncing back, and some high flyers are cooling off. It's a reminder of the old reversion to the mean adage, an excuse many of us mutter to ourselves when an investment sours. In short, the market's halftime report shows that trees don't grow to the sky, and even the ugliest stocks can have their day or year in the sun. So, the big picture. The economy's engine is humming, even in the face of trade tiffs and political drama. But under the hood, sentiment can shift quickly. Optimism and caution are doing a delicate dance on Wall Street. For investors and everyday 401k holders, it's a time to enjoy the gains but keep an eye on the exit, just in case this high-wire act starts to wobble. Inflation cools, but your grocery bill didn't. Inflation in the US is finally coming down to earth by the official numbers. The Consumer Price Index showed overall inflation at 2.7% in June, year over year, a far cry from the red-hot rates of 2022. That's firmly in moderate territory, close to what policymakers consider healthy. The Federal Reserve's aggressive interest rate hikes over the past 2 years seem to be doing their job slowing price growth. Great news, right? Well, tell that to anyone grocery shopping or paying utility bills. Prices themselves haven't fallen, they're just rising more slowly. In other words, disinflation is not deflation. As one economics professor bluntly put it, if inflation goes down, it means prices are rising more slowly, not that prices are going down. So consumers are still paying about 25% more for groceries than before the pandemic in many cases, and nobody is expecting those price tags to drop back to 2019 levels. At best, we're adjusting to a new normal of higher costs with hopefully smaller jumps each year. Nowhere is this dynamic clearer than at the grocery store. If you felt like your supermarket runs have been budget busters, you're not imagining things. A fascinating and somewhat alarming analysis this week connected the dots between extreme weather and food prices, suggesting that climate change is hitting us in the wallet at the checkout line. This new study in environmental research letters mapped out how 16 extreme weather events since 2022 led to immediate spikes in specific crop prices. Think about it. Drought shrivels the lettuce crop, and salad suddenly costs more. A massive flood wipes out a tomato harvest, and bang, your BLT gets pricier. It's an age-old story. Bad weather hurts crops. But climate change is turning up the volume. Researchers say climate-driven extremes are now a major driver of food inflation, second only to heat waves themselves in terms of how we feel climate change day to day. Some examples hit home hard. In 2022, severe droughts across California and Arizona devastated vegetable crops, contributing to an 80% year-over-year increase in U.S. vegetable prices by the end of that year. Imagine your broccoli and bell peppers nearly doubling in cost, largely because vast stretches of what should have been fertile farmland turned to dust. The study also noted 2023 droughts in Mexico drove vegetable prices up 20% the following winter, and droughts in Brazil sent coffee prices 55% higher globally. Your morning brew got a lot more expensive. Even abroad, heat waves in Japan were linked to a 48% jump in rice prices in late 2024. Closer to the UK, unusually wet winters have been blamed for a 22% spike in potato prices. Yes, even the trusty potato isn't safe. It's a 1-2 punch. Climate change is causing more frequent, intense weather disasters, and those in turn are directly making food more expensive in their immediate aftermath. As one researcher quipped, food supply and prices are now on the front lines of climate impacts, along with our electric bills during heat waves. For consumers, especially those living paycheck to paycheck, these price surges are devastating. Lower-income families, who spend a larger chunk of their budget on food, are getting hit the hardest. No wonder 2/3 of Americans say they are very concerned about the cost of groceries and basics. In fact, anxiety over grocery prices was a significant factor in the 2024 elections in the U.S. When egg prices jump or a gallon of milk starts feeling like a luxury item, people notice and they vote accordingly. Even as the overall inflation rate comes down, every trip to the store serves as a nagging reminder. Things are still expensive. We've tamed inflation, but not the actual high cost of living. And it's not just food. Rent, utilities, medical bills, they've all leapt up in recent years. A new report underscored how serious the cost of living crunch has become. It found that for the bottom 60% of U.S. households, a minimal quality of life is now financially out of reach. Let that sink in. The majority of Americans cannot comfortably afford the basics: housing, food, healthcare, transportation, and a few modest extras that together define a decent standard of living. According to this analysis by the Ludwig Institute, the gap between what people earn and what they need to earn for a minimal lifestyle has been widening. The middle class, one economist lamented, has been declining. We just haven't fully recognized it. It's a harsh reality. Even with a strong job market, wages haven't kept up with the surge in living costs for many. The so-called American dream, where if you work hard you can get ahead, feels like it's slipping away for a lot of families. Instead of saving for a home or college, many are struggling not to fall behind. This kind of widespread financial strain, the report warns, is really dangerous. Not just for individuals, but for society. It breeds frustration and unrest. So while inflation is cooling on paper, the everyday experience remains challenging. Households are adapting in creative ways, hunting for store brands, couponing, buying in bulk, or switching to cheaper substitutes. Hello chicken instead of pricey beef. Some relief may be on the horizon. For instance, if harvests rebound or energy prices stay in check, certain costs might level off. But the past week's news served as a reality check. Cooler inflation doesn't mean cheap prices. We've climbed a mountain of higher costs, and we might be staying at this elevation for a while. Keep budgeting wisely, and if you can, stash a little extra in that emergency fund. Because as we've seen, a freak storm or drought can suddenly make next month's bills even steeper. Rising debt and rates, a double-edged sword. While prices for goods and services have been climbing, so too has another thing: debt. Faced with higher costs of living, Americans have increasingly turned to credit cards to bridge the gap between paycheck and expenses. It's a nationwide trend that's setting off some alarm bells. As of early 2025, Americans owe around $1.2 trillion on credit cards, an all-time record high. Just in the final quarter of last year, people collectively added about $50 billion to their credit card balances, pushing the total past $1.13 trillion. That's a staggering figure, roughly equal to the GDP of an entire mid-sized country. The big drivers are no mystery. Even though inflation has eased, the prices of essentials, from housing to haircuts, remain elevated. So many families have leaned on plastic to maintain their standard of living. As one analyst noted, lower-income families in particular used credit card debt to supplement their incomes to maintain purchasing power in the face of higher prices. It was a survival strategy during the worst of the inflation surge. But now the credit card bill is coming due, and it's coming with hefty interest. To fight inflation, the Federal Reserve jacked up interest rates at a historically rapid pace. 11 rate hikes between March 2022 and July 2023, and rates have stayed high. Those Fed moves have translated into eye-watering credit card APRs. According to Bankrate, the average interest rate on new credit cards is about 20.7%, the highest on record going back to 1985. Let's put that in perspective. A $5,000 balance at 20% means roughly $1,000 in interest if you take a year to pay it off. For anyone carrying a balance month to month, which is roughly half of card users, these rate hikes are really squeezing budgets. Families who turn to credit cards to fill budget gaps now have higher interest payments, explains Mark Zandi, a noted economist. It's like a treadmill that's speeding up just as you're getting tired. Not a great situation. The human side of this debt story is both understandable and concerning. During the pandemic and immediate aftermath, a lot of extraordinary support. Stimulus checks, boosted unemployment benefits, eviction moratoriums, student loan pauses, helped people stay afloat. Many folks even paid down debt in 2020-21. But as those programs ended and prices rose, people gradually swiped their cards more to cover necessities. At first, low interest rates made it bearable, but now with rates so high that cushion is gone. We're seeing what one expert called a big fork in the road. Households that manage debt prudently are okay, but those who are maxed out are now getting hit with much higher repayment costs. Behavioral factors play a role too. The pandemic seems to have changed attitudes towards spending and saving. Some researchers say that after lockdowns, people splurged a bit. You only live once mentality. And the rise of tap-to-pay and online shopping made spending money feel almost too easy. Combine that with not having to pay student loans for a few years, if you had them. And it's no surprise many got a little lax with budgets. Unfortunately, those habits can linger even as circumstances change. What's the path forward? Paying down debt is priority number one for many financial advisors now. There's renewed talk of the snowball method versus avalanche method for tackling credit cards, i.e., pay off small balances first for psychological wins, or tackle the highest interest rate first for maximum savings. Any tax refund or bonus these days is more likely to go towards Visa or MasterCard balances than a vacation. On the bright side, the awareness of the debt problem is high, and consumers are nothing if not resilient. We may well see a collective belt tightening in the coming months. Less eating out, fewer discretionary purchases, more gig work on the side, all aimed at shrinking those balances. That, ironically, could slow consumer spending enough to cool inflation further. What a feedback loop. There's also a flip side to the high interest rate environment. Savers are finally earning something. Remember the sad 0.1% interest on savings accounts not long ago? Now banks and credit unions, especially online ones, are dangling 5% or even higher annual yields on high-yield savings accounts. For people who have managed to stash emergency funds or who are saving up for a down payment, that's a little bit of good news. This week, personal finance sites were abuzz about the best places to park your cash, whether in short-term treasury bills, money market funds, or those juicy online savings offers. Earning 5% risk-free isn't something we've seen in over 15 years, and it's a silver lining for the financially prudent. Of course, inflation being 3% means the real return is 2%, but hey, that beats zero by a mile. Meanwhile, mortgage rates remain elevated, which is a headache for homebuyers and homeowners alike. The average 30-year fixed mortgage rate in the U.S. hovered around 6.7% this week, essentially unchanged and stubbornly high in recent months. In fact, rates have been seesawing in the mid-6% to low 7% range for much of 2025. This is a far cry from the sub-3% mortgages people snagged in 2021. For the average buyer, that higher rate can mean hundreds of dollars more in monthly payments on the same house, which is keeping many would-be buyers on the sidelines. The housing market has cooled somewhat as a result. Prices aren't skyrocketing like they were, but they're not exactly cheap either. Because inventory, homes for sale, remains tight. Some relief. Freddie Mac reported that mortgage rates dipped slightly for the fifth week in a row, now averaging about 6.67% for a 30-year loan. That's down a bit from the peak, but as one analyst on CNBC quipped, we shouldn't expect them to nosedive anytime soon. In other words, 6 to 7% might be the new normal, at least until late 2025, when the Fed could start cutting rates if inflation stays contained. For homeowners with an existing low-rate mortgage, the incentive to sell and buy a new house, and thus take on a new high-rate loan, is very low, which is partly why we have a housing stalemate. Not enough sellers, not enough affordable deals for buyers. In summary, debt and interest rates are a mixed bag right now. Credit cards, bad and getting worse if you carry a balance. Mortgages, painful unless you locked in earlier. Student loans, about to restart. Many borrowers are bracing for payments if they haven't refinanced or aren't eligible for new relief plans. But savings accounts, finally a bright spot. The prudent path in times like these is clear. Reduce high-interest debt aggressively and take advantage of higher saving yields safely. It's not sexy or fun, but it pays off. And if you do decide to splurge on something, do it intentionally and within your means. The era of free money via 0% interest is over for now. Tax and policy changes, backfires and new rules. It wouldn't be a personal finance roundup without some updates on taxes and money policy. And this week had a few noteworthy ones, especially from across the pond in the UK. The theme could well be unintended consequences. First up, the British government learned a lesson in the tricky economics of taxation. The UK had slashed the capital gains tax allowance, the amount of profit you can make on investments before paying tax, in hopes of raising more revenue from investors. The result? A backfire. Capital gains tax receipts fell by 18% in the latest fiscal year, down to £12.1 billion. That's a sizable drop in money coming into the Treasury. Why did it happen? Likely because when the allowance was cut sharply, investors either held on to assets longer to avoid triggering taxable gains, or found other clever means to offset gains with losses. Essentially, the UK government's efforts to squeeze more tax out of investments may have discouraged people from realizing gains at all, leading to a revenue shortfall. It's almost ironic. Sometimes raising a tax or tightening an allowance yields less money, not more, because people change their behavior. This was a big talking point in UK personal finance circles. Should the Chancellor have seen this coming? Perhaps. It's a reminder that taxpayers can be quite responsive, some might say wily, in the face of new taxes. The takeaway for investors is also interesting. A lot of Brits are apparently buy and hold oriented now, partially for tax reasons. They'd rather not sell their second property or shares and incur a tax bill, so they sit tight. In another UK development, inheritance rules for pensions are changing. When someone passes away with money in a private pension, the process for taxing that inheritance is being tweaked. Bereaved families will now be responsible for reporting and paying tax on inherited pension funds themselves, rather than the pension providers handling it. This is a shift in administrative burden. The government's logic is that it streamlines the system and ensures taxes on pension inheritance are collected properly. But for grieving families, it might feel like getting saddled with paperwork and potential pitfalls at the worst possible time. Imagine, in the midst of mourning, having to figure out how to value and declare a loved one's pension pot to HM Revenue and Customs. Critics worry this could lead to confusion or accidental non-compliance, since not everyone is well-versed in tax rules, especially during an emotional period. Financial advisors in the UK are urging anyone with substantial pension savings to communicate clearly with their heirs and maybe get professional advice, so that when the time comes, the family isn't blindsided by the taxman. The change reflects a broader push by authorities to make sure they don't miss out on due taxes, but it certainly raised some eyebrows. Leave it to the Brits to make death and taxes even more inevitably intertwined, one commentator wryly noted. On a more positive note for workers, a trend in the UK that got spotlighted is the use of salary sacrifice schemes to save on taxes. This isn't a new policy per se, but the FT did a reader call-out asking people how they use salary sacrifice, indicating it's top of mind. Under these schemes, employees can take some of their compensation in the form of benefits, like extra pension contributions, childcare vouchers, cycle-to-work programs, or even an electric car lease, rather than straight salary. By doing so, they effectively lower their taxable income, potentially keeping themselves in a lower tax bracket and reducing income tax or national insurance contributions. It's a classic win-win. The employee gets a benefit they value, say a nursery bill paid pre-tax or a shiny new EV to drive, and pays less tax, while the employer often also saves on payroll taxes and enjoys a happier staff. Given that UK tax bands haven't moved much, fiscal drag is pulling more people into higher tax brackets as wages rise, these schemes are increasingly popular. One might call it a tax hack for the middle class. The government, interestingly, is generally okay with this because many salary sacrifice benefits, pensions, low-emission cars, childcare, align with policy goals. Just be careful. If you sacrifice too much salary, you could reduce your future state pension accrual or mortgage affordability in the eyes of lenders. Moderation is key, but if you hear your British colleague boasting about how they're getting £500 of childcare effectively free, now you know how. In the US, there weren't major new tax laws this week, but it's worth noting the continuing story on student loans, since it's almost a policy issue at this point. Borrowers are eyeing an upcoming August 1st deadline related to the new SAVE repayment plan, part of President Biden's revamp of income-driven student loan repayment. The SAVE plan promises to lower monthly payments for many by adjusting how income and family sizes are accounted for. Financial advisors are urging anyone with federal student loans to review their options now, before payments fully resume in September after a long pause. There's a real mix of emotions. Relief for some, who will see payments drop or remaining balances forgiven after a period, and anxiety for others, who don't qualify for relief and have to somehow fit a hefty loan payment back into their budget after 3+ years. It wasn't a headline grabber this week, but it's the calm before the storm as millions of Americans prepare for student loan payments to hit their accounts again. If that's you or someone in your family, consider this a nudge to check out the Department of Education's loan simulator, or consult the new rules. There might be ways to save a few bucks or avoid default. Lastly, a quick note. Social Security and Medicare discussions are simmering in the background. No changes this week, but there is chatter that later this year there will be debates on how to shore up Social Security's finances. The trust fund still faces a mid-2030s depletion date, and Medicare just announced new limits on certain drug price increases. Keep an eye on those. They're slow burn issues that will eventually affect everyone's personal finances either via taxes or benefits. Scams, bargains, and odd money matters. Not all personal finance news is about big macro trends. Often it's the smaller stories that directly impact our daily lives. Here are a few from this week that are worth noting, spanning from scams to sales. Beware the ticket scam. In the UK, excitement is building for the Women's Euro football final, but fans were warned to be vigilant about ticket scams targeting the high-demand match. Fraudsters have been offering fake tickets on secondary sites and social media, preying on desperate supporters. The message from authorities: think twice before buying from unauthorized sites. In other words, if you didn't get a ticket through official channels, be extremely careful. That too good to be true deal online might indeed be too good to be true. Sports and concert ticket scams are not new, but they spike whenever an event is sold out and hugely anticipated. So whether it's the Euros, a Taylor Swift concert, or the World Series, use official resale platforms or stick to face value exchanges among people you trust. Otherwise, you risk paying a fortune for a PDF that won't scan at the turnstile. Fine wine on sale. Cheers to that. Here's something you don't hear every day. Fine wine prices have taken a sharp fall. Yes, the coveted investment-grade wines, especially from regions like Bordeaux and Burgundy, have seen their prices dip significantly in recent months. After years of climbing valuations for rare vintages, the market has cooled. The Financial Times notes that prices for these top wines have fallen sharply, and savvy collectors are swooping in to pick up bargains. Why the drop? Partly a hangover, pun intended, from earlier speculative fervor. Wine had been seen as a hot alternative investment, but demand has softened. Also, China's crackdown on conspicuous gifting a while back hurt high-end wine demand, and some recent vintages were produced in larger quantities, easing scarcity. For oenophiles, wine lovers, with some cash, this is welcome news. You might snag that bottle of 2010 Bordeaux you've been eyeing for a lot less than last year. One wine merchant said this week that certain Burgundy Grand Crus are down 30% from their peak. It's still not cheap by any normal standard. We're talking bottles that cost hundreds if not thousands of dollars. But a sale is a sale. Collectors with keen eyes can indeed pick up some relative bargains now. So if you have a taste for the finer fermented things in life, it could be worth shopping around auction sites or fine wine exchanges. At the very least, it's nice to know something high-end got cheaper in 2025. Add next-gen payday loans? An interesting piece in Time highlighted the rise of earned wage access apps. Essentially, apps that let workers get an advance on their paycheck for a fee. They are marketed as cheaper alternatives to payday loans, helping people cover an emergency expense or bill before the actual payday arrives. Apps like Earnin, Dave, and others fall in this category. Indeed, they usually charge just a few dollars or an optional tip to unlock, say, $100 of your upcoming salary, which is far less predatory than payday lenders who might charge $15 per $100, equating to 400% plus APRs. However, Time's cautionary note, those fees can add up. If you're regularly tapping these apps, you might be stuck in a cycle not unlike living paycheck to paycheck, because essentially you're borrowing from your future self and paying for the privilege. One financial counselor noted that while these services help avoid overdrafts or desperation loans, they don't address the core issue, not earning or saving enough to absorb shocks. So the advice was to use them sparingly and work on building an emergency fund so you don't need them. Also, be aware of any privacy or security trade-offs. You often have to link your bank account and paycheck info. In short, these apps are a tool, potentially life-saving in a pinch, but not a long-term financial strategy. Cheaper than payday loans, yes, but still a sign that cash flow problems exist. If you find yourself using them often, it might be time to revisit your budget or talk to a financial coach. Mind the generation gap. Though not a specific news item of the week, a recurring theme in personal finance discussions has been the differing money habits across generations. A survey making the rounds noted that Gen Z and millennials are far more likely to openly talk about salaries, investing tips, and side hustles with peers, whereas Gen X and boomers grew up considering such talk taboo. This cultural shift isn't tied to a single day's news, but it underpins a lot of what we see in personal finance media. From the rise of FinTalk influencers, young folks giving finance advice on TikTok, to more employers posting salary ranges. It's an interesting development. Could more openness about money lead to better financial outcomes? Perhaps. At the very least, younger people are sharing budgeting hacks and investment memes in equal measure, which can demystify finance, though there's also misinformation risk. The takeaway: each generation has something to teach the other. A blend of old school wisdom, like living within means, which many boomers excelled at, and new school savvy, like monetizing digital skills, which Gen Z is great at, might be the recipe for thriving in today's economy. Odds and ends. A few quick hits. The Get Britain Investing campaign rolled out new ads to encourage stock market investment, but commentators largely yawned, saying an ad blitz isn't enough to change a culture of low investing. Brits have historically loved property more than stocks, and that won't flip overnight. In corporate news that spills into personal finance, a major crypto lender was in hot water for essentially becoming a microfinance on steroids scheme, reminding everyone that chasing high yields in crypto remains extremely risky. And for the pop culture finance crossover, former TV host Stephen Colbert made headlines after being canceled in the showbiz sense, which led to discussions about financial fallout for those in entertainment who suddenly lose income. It's a niche case, but a high-profile reminder of the importance of diversified income and savings. Even celebrities need an emergency fund, it turns out. Looking ahead and final thoughts. As we wrap up this week's summary, the narrative in personal finance remains one of cautious optimism mixed with pragmatism. The economy at large is performing well, giving hope that a soft landing, taming inflation without a recession, is possible. But individuals are feeling the pinch of past inflation in their daily expenses, and many are leveraging new tools or strategies, whether it's apps, side gigs, or tax-saving schemes, to cope with the high cost of living. The key moving forward will be resilience, paying down high-interest debts, taking advantage of opportunities, like those high savings rates, and staying alert to scams or pitfalls that tend to proliferate in uncertain times. There's also a thread of adaptation in all this. Climate change forcing adaptation in our budgets, technology changing how we manage money, political shifts altering tax landscapes. Change is constant. The more agile and informed we are, the better we can navigate whatever comes next. If a drought can make lettuce pricey, maybe plant a small garden. If credit card rates are insane, maybe prioritize killing that debt and think twice about charging the next big purchase. If an offer seems too good, cheap Euro final tickets perhaps, double check before you leap. On a lighter note, let's celebrate that not everything is doom and gloom. If you're a wine lover or an investor in collectibles, sales do happen, even if it's on luxury Bordeaux. And if you're a football fan who missed out on tickets, well, there's always the pub or a watch party, which can be just as fun and much cheaper. And you won't get scammed out of $500. As always, knowledge is power in personal finance. The fact you've listened to a 30-plus minute rundown means you're arming yourself with information. And that's a great step. Stay curious, stay careful, and stay confident. With a bit of planning and savvy, you can ride the economic waves rather than be drowned by them. Until next week, take care of your money, and it will take care of you. And maybe raise a glass of now affordable fine wine to toast the end of another week. Cheers.